Do you remember the Indo-Pacific? I won't blame you if you don't. It was all the rage before last year, but then Russia invaded Ukraine and suddenly all the attention is back on Europe. But that does not mean the Indo-Pacific is doing any better. The Chinese threat is still there. Maritime incursions, unnecessary military drills, it's all happening in the shadow of Ukraine. But that's the thing about geopolitics. You cannot afford to be distracted or myopic. You must be ready to multitask. The question is Joe Biden up to that challenge? Well, his schedule certainly says he is. The US president hosted the South Korean president last week. This week, he's hosting the president of the Philippines. And later this month, he's hitting the road. Papua New Guinea first and Australia after that. All these trips and summits are focused on one region, the Indo-Pacific. Let's begin with the ongoing one. The president of the Philippines landed in Washington on Sunday. This man, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a.k.a. Bong Bong Marcos, that's what he's called. He'll be meeting Joe Biden later today. It promises to be a tough balancing act for him. On the one hand, Marcos wants to deepen his ties with the US, forge an even stronger relationship, he says. Those were his words. At the same time, he's keen to be on China's good books. He has promised a quote-unquote golden age in relations with China. So it'll be a balancing act. And for Joe Biden, this meeting is already a concession. Let me tell you why. Senator Biden was a critic of Marcos Sr. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Marcos was a dictator. He ruled the Philippines for 20 years. Now his son is in power and President Biden is courting him. The same son who has lawsuits pending against him in US courts. He is being welcomed by the US president. So much for putting principles first. Looks like Biden has suddenly discovered political pragmatism. Either way, today's talks will heavily feature defense. The US has access to 9 military bases in the Philippines. The assumption is they will be key in the defense of Taiwan. Now, Marcos has tried to play it safe so far. He granted America access to more bases. At the same time, he stopped them from storing lethal weapons. Sort of like a half measure. Biden will be hoping to bring the Philippines firmly into his corner. His job is to reaffirm US commitment on two things. One is mutual defense. The second is financial assistance and development. So that's Joe Biden's agenda this week, getting the Philippines on board. Later this month, he'll be traveling to Papua New Guinea, the first American president to travel there in more than a century. And that should tell you something about the neglect. In Papua New Guinea, Biden will attend the Pacific Islands Forum. 18 leaders of the Pacific Islands will be present. So will the leaders of Australia and New Zealand. Interestingly, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be in the country. He too will meet the Pacific leaders. And that should tell you how much attention this region is now getting. In fact, Joe Biden's Pacific pivot started last year. He hosted Pacific leaders at the White House. He also pledged aid and dispatched Vice President Kamala Harris on a tour. Now he himself is on the job. The question is, will it be enough? Because the US has long ignored these islands in the Pacific. It had unmatched military power in the region, so nothing else mattered. Not financial aid, not infrastructure projects, not climate change investments. But China was playing the long game here. China is now the biggest bilateral lender in the region, much bigger than America and Australia. It has funded more than 100 projects. I'm talking about roads, airstrips, ports, strategic assets with civilian and military uses. China has an investment in all of them. And last year, it pushed for even greater influence. China pitched a security pact with 10 Pacific nations. It was a sweeping proposal. Reports say it would have given China military bases in the region, even allowed them to deploy troops. Thankfully, the Pacific nations rejected it. And that rejection should give Biden some hope. But if he wants to recruit Pacific Islands against Beijing, he must do two things. A, put his money where his mouth is. The Pacific Islands need help to fight against climate change. It's an existential threat for them. They need millions of dollars in investment to tackle it. And secondly, Biden needs to build a broad coalition. The US alone cannot convince the islands, but a broader alliance of democracies can. Which is why Prime Minister Modi's presence could be a game changer here. The Pacific Islands have already been let down by the US, Australia and New Zealand, but India is different. India is a member of the Global South, and it's now on the high table. India's lessons and skills could be key for the Pacific region. In return, New Delhi will also get some valuable diplomatic support, because don't forget, every vote counts at the UN. And the Pacific Forum alone has 18 votes. All these meetings and trips will conclude at the Opera House in Sydney. That's where the Quad leaders are meeting. It's not going to be an easy mission for Joe Biden. You can't neglect countries for decades and expect them to support you later. Biden's test will be convincing Pacific leaders about his campaign slogan in 2020, that America is back.